Wow, what a prayer. Like a new young professor with too much to say and too short a time to say it, Paul is almost tripping over himself in run-on sentences, tumbling phrases, going here and there. This is almost like skiing down a black slope when you're a beginner and you're just trying to arrive at the bottom alive and in one piece. Fasten your seatbelts as we go into this amazing prayer. And where does Paul take us first? He takes us to our knees. I bow my knees, and we bow our knees before our Father. Think of the times you have bowed your knees. Maybe you've been on your knees frequently praying. I remember a few years ago when I was a visiting scholar and lecturer at New College in Oxford. It was called New College because it was new in 1379. I remember being up and down over and over through the services in the morning and the evening through that whole time there at Oxford. I remember once preaching at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, a beautiful big sanctuary like this, where the pulpit is much higher than this one. In fact, it's almost as high as the area where the choir sings. I walked up there the other day and I thought it would really be fun to preach a sermon from right up there sometime. Well, I was getting ready to preach at Fourth Church Chicago, and I started up the long steps to the pulpit, and by accident, I stepped on the edge of my robe, and I kept getting smaller and smaller, and by the time I got up to the top, I was down here, and I had to back all. It's very humbling to be on your knees, I want you to know. We had a woman join our church in Dallas a few years ago, a lifelong Episcopalian, she said. She was in her 80s. And she said, now I am becoming a Presbyterian, as she met with the session. So we finally wanted to ask her, well, why, after being a lifelong Episcopalian, you decided to become a Presbyterian? She said, well, Dr. Carl, I know you want me to say it's your sermons or the theology of the Presbyterian Church or the polity, but the truth is I've just had both knees redone and I'm not kneeling anymore. Well, there are all kinds of reasons to become Presbyterians, aren't there? What is it that brings you to your knees? Maybe it's pain and suffering of some kind or another. Maybe it's the loss of a job or the loss of a loved one. Something brings us to our knees eventually in this life. And Paul says you're not alone, because when you bow to your knees, you bow before the Father, from whom every family in heaven derives its name. In other words, there's a great cloud of witnesses that is about us, those who have gone before us, but also those who are sitting around us right now, here, even in this place. Do you know what it feels like to know that people are actually praying for you? That's what Paul was experiencing even in his times in prison. He knew that all the churches he had started were filled with people who were praying for him. Several years ago, I was lecturing at the Luther Academy of the Rockies in Colorado, and one of the other lecturers was Paul Hansen from Harvard, and another one was Catherine Kobe, who had been a hostage in Iran, and she talked about how much that meant to her, to know that people were praying for her day after day. Soon after I came to Pittsburgh Seminary, my administrative assistant called me and was whispering on the phone. She said, Dr. Carl, there are 12 students right outside your office, and they want to talk to you right now. And I said, well, what do they want? She said, I don't know, but should I just send them away? I said, no, don't send them away. Let's see what they want. So they all came in, and I looked, and they had big smiles on their faces. And I said, I only have 8 chairs. We're going to have to pull in some more chairs. They said, no, we only need 1 chair because we're so excited you're here. Could we lay our hands on you and pray for you and anoint you with oil? Would that be okay, Dr. Carl? Well, duh, yeah, of course it would be okay. You know, some Presbyterians actually do know how to pray, and they pray pretty well, you know. Those young people prayed really well. Did you know if you reorder the letters of the word Presbyterian, it comes out best in prayer? Did you know that? Oh, now some of you are going to start doing it on your bulletin, I know. But if you reorder Episcopal, it comes out Pepsi-Cola. So, I mean, you know. But I will actually say here publicly that I think Episcopalians are better at prayer than Presbyterians. In fact, one of the very best students to graduate from Pittsburgh Seminary just a month ago is an Episcopalian from right here in Birmingham, Alabama, who came all the way to Pittsburgh to go to school. Some people know how to pray, and Paul wants us to be good prayers. He says, not only are you on your knees, and not only are you surrounded by people who are praying for you, but you are also filled with the Spirit in your inner being, especially when you feel down. And we all feel down at some time or another. We wonder if we're even able to go on, and that's when the Spirit in prayer fills our inner being. In some ways, Paul is saying that the Spirit is kind of a pick-me-up, not a spiritual caffeine, because that would be much too trivial a way to describe it. No, the Spirit is like a breath of fresh air. In fact, it means breath, the pneuma, ruach in Hebrew, it means breath. This breath of fresh air that sweeps through and fills every part of your being. And it gives you a pick-me-up when you wonder if you're able to go on. I remember visiting with a woman whose 16-year-old daughter had died. And she said the day after Meredith died, the pain was so bad that I just went into the bedroom and I prayed, God, I know you can't change what's happened. Just take the edge of the pain off for a little bit. And she said, it worked. It was like a spiritual Demerol. Prayer has that effect on you. Prayer helps you be able to deal with stress and worry. You know, we all worry way too much. We even have a long worry list and we let other people add to it. We think we can keep ships afloat with our worrying. And worry is a sign that we really don't trust in God to be sovereign over all nature and history. I learned a long time ago that worry needs to be delegated. You need to take those worries and delegate them to other people, pass them on so someone else will take care of them. But prayer is the ultimate way to delegate worry, because when you can learn how to say, God, I've done everything I can to deal with this problem, humanly possible, everything I can do. Now I'm giving it to you. When you can let your worries go to Almighty God, it's an amazingly liberating thing in your life. I learned that a long time ago. I really don't worry about much of anything. I'm concerned about things, but worry affects your health. Paul wants us in prayer to learn how to overcome worry, to be filled with the Spirit in our inner being. And sometimes in prayer, if we're listening carefully enough, we hear the very voice of God speaking to us, getting our attention. Last Sunday after the 11 o'clock service, I was out on the steps there shaking hands as I do every week, and Jeff had just finished the postlude, and some woman came up to me and whispered really loudly, Dr. Carl, your mic is still on, and it's broadcasting all over the sanctuary. And I'm just glad I wasn't saying anything I shouldn't have said out there on the steps, because sometimes preachers do. One time I was testing my mic in Dallas, and you could test it from far away. In fact, I could sit in my office and test the mic and ask the sound booth operator if it sounded okay. And I thought, just for fun, I knew no one was in there. I just yelled out into the mic, "This is the Lord. You need to straighten up your life and change your ways." And the sound booth operator said there was a drunk on the front pew who ran out right at that moment. See, sometimes, even in prayer, You hear the very voice of God getting your attention. But listen to how the Trinity works in here, because we've had Father and Spirit, and now Paul brings in Christ, another part of the Trinity. He says, who is right there, ready to come in and dwell in your heart. It's really beautiful how Paul puts it here. Christ is there waiting patiently for you and for me. And he never forces his way into our hearts. He wants us to invite him in. See, some preachers make the mistake of thinking that Christianity is about a system of theology, but it's actually about a person, and it's about a relationship. Don't give the congregation ideas, said one of my teachers. Give them the gospel. Because there is no way that you can reason people into the faith. You can only pray them into the faith. There was a woman I knew in a previous church named Marguerite Mizell, who was an amazing woman. She had been a missionary to China from the 20s up to 48 when the communists kicked her out, and she went back to Taiwan and learned Taiwanese and Hakka. Then she came back to the United States. She was 101 finally when I buried her, but she visited everyone in the church, and she had this amazing spirit. She had this Mother Teresa kind of face, and she wasn't thrown off by anything. She went to a musical one night, and she was in her 80s, and a thief got in her face with a gun and said, "Your money or your life, lady." And she smiled, and she said, "Now, young man, you don't want to do that." And he said, "Lady, I said your money, I've got a gun. It's your money or your life." And she said, "Oh, I've seen much worse than this on the mission field. Let me tell you about Jesus." And he took off just like that. I'm convinced if he'd stayed, she would have converted him right on the spot. We watched in the narthex, and when she got a bead on a visitor, we knew they were going to join the very next Sunday. She didn't try to reason people into the faith. She prayed them into the faith. She prayed that Christ would dwell in their hearts. And when we see this in this text, we know that Christ is not coming in as a house guest just to stay in a guest room. No, Christ is coming as a permanent resident, coming to set up house. In fact, to knock some walls down and to renovate the heart of our house. And the heart here for Paul is not the seat of the emotions. That's the splanchna. In medicine is the splanchnic nerve. It is the down in the bowels. That's where the emotions were in the Bible. No, the heart is the intellect and the mind, the will. It's kind of all of who you are. So when Christ comes to dwell in your heart, in the text that Paul is talking about here, it means it's filling every part of who you are. And you can't experience that unless you take time in prayer every single day to be still and to know that God is God. It's very hard to do in our world. It's this noisy world with TVs and radios and smartphones and tablets. I understand. I use all these things myself, but every once in a while it's important to just stop and be still and know that God is God. In a Trappist monastery where they take silence very seriously, a young monk came in to be a new monk in that monastery, and the abbot said, "Well, we take silence very seriously here. You only get 2 words every 5 years." 2 words? He said, "Yes." And at the end of 5 years, he said, "What are your 2 words?" He said, "Bed hard." He said, "Okay, well," and 5 more years went by, and he said, "What are your 2 words?" He said, "Food hard, food bad." And he said, "Well, okay," and another 5 years go by, and he said, "What are your 2 words?" He said, "Want out." And the abbot said, "I'm not surprised. You've done nothing but gripe and complain since you came here." How important it is for us to be still and to know that God is God. Why is it important? It's important because it's the only way you will ever understand the breadth and the height and the depth that Paul talks about in this prayer of the fullness of God. It's the only way you will begin to get a glimpse of eternity, which I believe when we even come into this place, I believe you get a glimpse of eternity when you help the suffering and the poor. I believe we got a glimpse of eternity last Friday when we saw the summer learning program do their celebration, their graduation. It was absolutely amazing. And when you get a glimpse of eternity, you are able to have the long view of life. You are able to handle whatever God brings you. And then you are filled, as Paul says here, to the brim with the fullness of God. Imagine what that would be like, to be filled to the brim in your life so that everything else in your life is pushed away and you are filled to the brim with the fullness of God. Like the little boy who fell into the barrel of molasses and prayed, "Oh Lord, make my capacity equal to my opportunity." We need to pray that. We need to know that God wants to fill our lives. You know, we've done studies on this, and we have found that churches that are alive and active and growing together are churches where every single member of the church is praying every single day. May it be so at IPC, knowing that what Paul is talking about here is taking time out every day for some prayer. Our 5-year-old granddaughter, Maggie, visited us recently and kept us very busy, as grandchildren do. When we went to visit her and her parents in Washington, D.C. when she was 2, we said, we'll keep her out of day school. It'll be okay for a day. And her mother said, "Oh, she's a poster child for the terrible twos. We have to have time out with her every single day. And you're going to have time out with her." And say, "We'll be okay. You know, grandchildren are more relaxed, you know. I mean, when you're parents and you have the first child and the pacifier hits the ground, you sanitize it, you boil it before you put the second child, you blow it off. The third child, you just plug it back in." And Alex Haley, one of our friends, said, you know, there's a reason that grandparents and grandchildren get along so well together. And we said, "What, Alex?" He said, "They have a common enemy." So we understand, you see, you got that one, that's good. We'll be fine. We said, "We'll be fine." And they left. And she was playing at a kitchen little short table there. And all of a sudden she picked up her chair and she hauled it to the corner of the kitchen. We said, "Maggie, what are you doing?" She plopped down and, "What are you doing?" "I'm having time out." "Well, why? You're being a good girl. You don't." "Oh, I have time out every day. I'm just going ahead and getting out of the way now." Imagine what it would be for you and me to have time out with God every single day of our lives. To this God be all honor and blessing and glory and praise from this day forth and forevermore. God bless you all.